The Bible is very specific about the kind of redemption it is advertising. The Bible is very specific about the kind of redemption it is advertising. And there are key things that when we see them, we are supposed to know, and we should know, that we are in a fraudulent experience. Two of those main things. One, the scheme of Egypt. The triad there with the source of dying and rising energy within all of that. And the next one there is the code of Moses, or the religious code of Moses, which is righteousness. One's righteousness, one's piety, one's supposed divine favor by handwritten religious laws. Now, this is the way that the Bible seemingly wants us to understand that this is how things operate. This is how things should operate, and this is what is seen as the Bible supporting a type of devotional lifestyle. Because in every single one of the pages, you have a handwritten religious law dictating the events to take place within somebody's devotional or religious lifestyle. But with the illustration of the crucifixion, seeing that broken down, we're actually seeing the mind within the scriptures condemning that lifestyle. I'm not going to review all of that, but when you see that crucified body, that body, Galatians 3:13, philosophically representing the philosophy of the religious law or the code of Moses, when we see that body crucified, we're seeing that code crucified also. So that's the condemnation against that lifestyle and against the practice of the handwritten religious law. But why does it seem as though this is the general code? Why does it seem like this is the general thing to do? Like this is just the way that religion is. It is a strictness from what is handwritten. Well, the answer to that is the Bible tells us plainly that this is supposed to be the inescapable doctrine, the inescapable exercising within the religious world. The religious world is, without escape, to conduct itself by handwritten religious laws. There is nothing that anyone can do about it. The same way that no one can manipulate the bounds of the waters, the same way that no one can manipulate the circulation of their blood within their system, the same way that no one can manipulate the way that bile is broken down into their stomach, whether it happens or not, how it happens, is the same way that no one can manipulate the established ethic for this realm that we call Earth. The established ethic in the world of philosophy or religion for this earth, the established ethic within the religious world, for us alive now, past, future, it will always be the handwritten religious law. The code of Moses will be the way that religion is supposed to exist, that the religious experience are supposed to get down. That's just the way it is. Why? Well, the Bible tells us in the book of Genesis why that is. And in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, 26 and 27, where it says, God said, let us make man in our own image. And then that's 26. And then verse 27, it says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Now, this is interesting because there are different ways you can go about this outside of the Bible, but allowing the Bible to speak for its own self and taking into consideration, and if we're going to take into consideration the fact that this is true from John 4:24, that God is a spirit, what is here created, if God is saying, let us make man in our own image, is not a physical entity. It's not a physical entity. The image of God here, if we're going to continue to take John 4:24 true, and then Luke 24:39, that a spirit does not have flesh and bones. So what is here being created, in all actuality, is not human. Okay, so what is the image of God? Because it is the image of God. It is this image of God. It is the image of God that is the stamp. That is the stamp of what the religious world is, what the body of the traditional religious conversation is. The image of God rules what the outlook for every single religious conversation is supposed to be seen as and is supposed to operate through. If we can understand what the image of God is, which is not flesh, because again, John 4:24, Luke 24:39, God is a spirit. The spirit does not have flesh and bones. What is here spoken of is not literal. What is being created is not a literal creation. And let's not, again, jump to that strange conclusion that what is here created is some sort of phenomenal spiritual entity, ghost-like thing. That's not what the Bible is here, again, talking about. What is image? Let's just simplify that word according to the Bible. What is image? The book of Job 4:15 and 16. The book of Job the book of Job chapter 4 verses 15 and 16. Job chapter 4:15 and 16 reads, "Then a spirit passed before my face. The hair of my flesh stood up." Verse 16, "It stood still, but I could not discern the form thereof. An image was before mine eyes. There was silence, and I heard a voice saying," and then the verse goes on. Pointing this verse out here because you have image in this verse. But another word used for image is form. "I could not discern the form thereof. An image was set before me." So when we're thinking of this term image, we can't just think copy. We can't think copy because that's not the context. If it was copy, we would not be flesh and bones. We would all be whatever we imagine the word spirit to be. So the idea of copy meaning image, that's not a resolution for this kind of situation in the book of Genesis. We can substitute that word image in the book of Genesis, though, due to the context, because of the context, for form. For form. They were made in the form of God. And that's a little bit more interesting. That's a lot better. Because when you think about what the form of God is, if God is a spirit, and if a spirit does not have flesh and bones, what then is the form of that? What's the form of that is what we need to get to. And it's obvious, because if there is no limbs, no nothing, no body, all you have is mind. All you have is mind. The image of God is mind. But not simply just mind as, I'm just going to leave that there as vague as it is, because that's very vague. There's a particular mind of God that the religious world and the individual created within it has to don the likeness of what God is. And so it is mind, a particular kind of mind. But what kind of mind is that? Genesis 1:6 and 7. What kind of form is the image of God? If there is nothing physical, and even if there is no ghostly physical thing attached to it, what is the form that we should be thinking about? Genesis 1:6 and 7 gives us an idea. Genesis 1:6 and 7 tells us in verse 6, "And God said," and then verse 7, "And it was so." So this form is a little bit different because it's not the traditional form. Remember, this form is mind. When we're thinking of the form of this kind of mind, we should be thinking about the kind of disposition. We should be thinking about structure. We should be thinking about organization. We should be thinking about something more than what we imagine to be a physical copy.
I don't know about you, but I enjoy using my imagination. When words are able to mix and mash to create a positive intellectual and moral experience, and when placed into the context of fantasy fiction, then I must admit that there is no better way to spend time than perusing through such words. Azazel, the search for life after death is filled with captivating action and dialogue, making you not want to put the book down. Visit Amazon and see the matchless wonder for yourself.
So keeping with this idea of form meaning image. It is the form of God. Man was created in the form of God. What is the form of God? Genesis 1, 6 and 7, and God said, verse 7, and it was. Genesis 1, 9 through 11, verse 9, and God said, by verse 11, and it was so. Genesis 1, 20 and 21, and God said, verse 21, and God saw that it was good. So there is no image, right? If all we had was Genesis 1 to understand what the image of God was, we would be able to either, one, assume and speculate that that image is a natural image, if we weren't really thinking deep about it. But if we were actually thinking about it without having any other book or chapter of the Bible, we only had Genesis 1, if we had to understand what the image of God is just from Genesis 1 without having an image of God there, how would we go about determining it? And this is the question I like to bring up a lot to different individuals that talk to me about this and that have questions about Genesis 1 and that have questions about the image of God and that have questions about Adam and that have questions about Genesis 2 and that have questions about what took place in Eden in chapter 3, that have really interesting questions about how to get down to what all of that's talking about. And so my response is always along the lines of strip away every other one of these chapters. Deal only with chapter 1, that's all you have. If you can get the image of God from this one chapter, from just this one chapter, well then you're doing pretty good. Because there's no physical image of God. Why? John 4:24. God is a spirit. There's no physical image of God. Why? Luke 24:39. A spirit does not have flesh and bones. So if you're trying to understand what the image of God is and all you have is Genesis 1, how are you going to go about that? Knowing, and you just know that you can't, there is no God you can see. There is nothing you can see. There's no place where God is. You can say God is in the trees and all that, but that's not intelligent enough to give a valid argument of anything. There is no God around. There is nothing. All you have is this one chapter to be able to understand the physicality that is around you. How do you get down to what that is? What is God's image? Well, you have here an outline of a particular frame of mind. The outline of this particular frame of mind is that God said, and it was done. Is that God said, and it was so. Is that God said, and God said that and God saw that it was good. What we have here is a character. The mind of a character. The image of God is the mind of a character. We have to be able to understand this from that very first chapter and through the verses that are given to us. This is the mind of a character. The type of character that when they speak, what they speak is as good as everything that exists, to the point where it must be obeyed, and is. Looking at Psalm 148, 4 and 5. Psalm 148, 4 and 5. Psalm 148, 4 and 5. Praise him, you heavens of heavens, and you waters that be above the heavens. Let them praise the name of the Lord, for he commanded and they were created. For he commanded and they were created. Psalm 33, 8 and 9. Psalm 33, 8 and 9. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. For he spake, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast. He commanded, and it stood fast. He spake, and it was done. This is a mind. This is a specific mind of character, where something is spoken, and when it is spoken, it is done. When it is done, it is seen as good. And when it is seen as good, it is seen as favored. Repeat this cycle over and over again. And what is the image of God? So when you have a voice speaking, right? You have a voice speaking. That voice is speaking, and what is said is obeyed. When what is obeyed is seen as doing or being good and receiving blessing and favor, what do you call that? What kind of interaction is that? Because again, this is the mind of character that is displaying the image of God. What we're seeing here, and God said, and it was good, and God said, and it was so, and God said, and God saw that it was good. What we're seeing here, this is the image of God. This is the image of God. What is that? Deuteronomy 6. Deuteronomy 6, 24 and 25. Deuteronomy 6, 24 and 25. Deuteronomy 6, 24 and 25 reads, And the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God, for our good always, that he might preserve us alive, as it is at this day. And it shall be our righteousness if we observe to do all these commandments before the Lord our God, as he hath commanded us. This, Deuteronomy 6, 24 and 25, is the image of God. The image of God is one speaking and another doing. And when the other is doing what they have done, due to what has been said, is being seen as good, righteous, favorable. What we're seeing, the image of God, and what is in Deuteronomy 6, 24 and 25, is a philosophy. The mind of character demonstrating the image of God is a philosophy. And I've said previously and have shown in different episodes that philosophy I call the philosophy of the religious law. The philosophy of the religious law, where you have one saying, and not just any one, you have the conscience of priest, pastor, minister, religious leader, religious authority, religious expert, scholar, saying one thing, and it being or becoming handwritten law to do for the purpose of piety, favor, righteousness, and so on and so forth. The image of God is the handwritten religious philosophy. The philosophy of the religious law is how man was made. The philosophy of the religious law is the image that was put into man. And that changes the entire context or the entire construct of Genesis 1, 2, and 3, because I've gone through this before in different episodes. The definition or the term man in the Bible, and specifically in Genesis 1 and 2 and 3, is not in reference to human male. It is in reference to member of priesthood. It is in reference to priest to minister. Genesis 1, 2, and 3, while written however they are written, they're actually written to convey the creation and the establishment of the code and of the ethic of the religious world. In the religious world, the general and automatic blueprint for the religious world is the handwritten religious philosophy, because that has been placed into man, or as the Bible says, into the sons of men. Mankind, and the type of mankind the Bible is talking about is not the type of mankind that is human. It is mankind meaning priest kind. The religious world and the men or the man or the priest or minister or the mind coming from the religious world has the blueprint of the Code of Moses, which is the handwritten religious law. This is the blueprint because that's the image of God. So when you think about the controversy within the scriptures and the illustration of the crucifixion, it's actually pointing to an exodus from the image of God. And that's very fascinating when you think about it.
We are to have, as is said and believed when it comes to life and religion, faith. But when it comes to exercising faith, a very crucial aspect of having and exercising faith isn't mentioned. In order to have faith in anything, we need to know what we would have faith in. This book looks into how the Bible defines the process of justification. We are supposed to know what we believe. Personal knowledge will bring life to our experience with the Bible. Get justification to know how to safely take care of your faith.
It's fascinating because the controversy in Eden is a controversy against the philosophy of the religious law. And keeping this simple, the pair in Eden took that tree to be a law establishing their righteousness. They took that tree to be a law establishing their righteousness. That tree was set there purposely because it had the blueprint of the image of God within it. It had the blueprint of the image of God within it. The image of God is an image where nakedness must be covered. Where nakedness must be covered through rites, through baptism, through ceremonies, through such and through such, or as the Genesis author says, through fig leaves, which is figurative language meaning worthless instruments. Through fig leaves, through worthless instruments, their conversation was covered. And those worthless instruments were structured, handwritten religious laws, which they took that tree to be. That tree was set there for the purpose of examining their loyalty to the movement of an exodus away from that type of devotional lifestyle. The fact that they failed showed the pull in the gravitational force that the handwritten religious law has over the mind. The general blueprint, it is inescapable, is to take an instrument for a law of righteousness, to take a figure for a law of righteousness, to take a theory for a law of righteousness, to take a commandment for a law of righteousness. This controversy in Eden was a controversy establishing the controversy at the center of the scriptures, which the illustration of the crucifixion settles. Seeing that body crucified, again, we are seeing the concept of the philosophy of the religious law crucified, because the author of Galatians 3, verse 13, really harps on that body representing the philosophy of the religious law. At the end of their the end of their second chapter in the book of Galatians, we are told that if righteousness comes by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. That's the very last verse of that chapter. And this is the overarching theme within the scriptures, is the conflict and the controversy between the conversation adhering to the handwritten religious law, the handwritten religious law being the image of God, against the conversation not adhering to the handwritten religious law. That conversation mirroring the regeneration that Adam experienced prior to being placed into Eden. Two different experiences. Genesis 1 has an experience where the handwritten religious law is the ruler of the conscience. Genesis 2 is an experience where the handwritten religious law is not ruler. The individual is woken up from that to become alive, to become living, for a different experience. So when we're seeing the Bible illustrate to us things that we need to understand that are related to our necessary exodus. Things such as deity worship, energy given from the dying and rising demigod, the triad from the Egyptian religion. When we're seeing the code of Moses implementing such a dynamic type of experience, or a supposedly dynamic type of experience, we should really know that our minds and the body of our conversation is actually in religious, spiritual, and devotional slavery. We are enslaved when we are giving our conversation to this way of life. And it's maybe interesting to hear, but according to what the image of God is, we are enslaved. Our conscience, and our conversation's conscience is enslaved by the image of God. And maybe that's hard to hear, but the Bible's philosophy is against the constriction of the conscience and the liberation of the devotional conversation for the well-being of the human being by experiencing the words that are within the scriptures.